Welcome. Please do come in if you can. Find somewhere to stand. Don't worry, there's not going to be too much sitting around this evening. I want to welcome you all to this celebration of London and Legacies of Migration. My name's Claire Langhammer. I'm Director of the Institute of Historical Research, a proud supporter of this event. I'm also here to represent the School of Advanced Study, and in particular the Warburg Institute and the Institute of English Studies, without whom this event would not be taking place. Tonight has been designed with joy and celebration in mind. And I want to start by thanking Kinetica Blocco, our absolutely brilliant band. I have to say that was just... That was just such a totally magical way of starting this event, and just seeing you coming down the stairs was just absolutely wonderful. So thank you. I also want to thank you all for being here. These kind of events get their energy from everybody who comes to them. So it's really lovely to see this room so full of people tonight. And I would also like to offer further thanks to the John Coffin Memorial Fund for offering financial support and, importantly, for paying for the wine, which we will be enjoying later on. So thank you very much. And finally, I would also like to thank the University of London and, in particular, the Vice-Chancellor, Wendy Thompson, who I think may be here tonight somewhere. Thank you, Wendy. Senate House sits at the heart of London, and it's therefore particularly apt that we're celebrating the launch of this absolutely beautiful book here tonight. Cultures of London, and the book table over there, you can go and have a browse, have a look through the book later on. It builds on and speaks to a long history of research on London conducted in and around this building and the colleges of University of London. The book celebrates the rich diversity of London life over time, whilst also showing how we can write books from diverse perspectives as academics, as artists, as broadcasters, and as curators. In fact, the book is a triumph for collaboration and cooperation on multiple levels. It is rather beautifully, I noticed when I picked up a copy earlier, dedicated to Londoners everywhere. Now, tonight's lineup is going to start with about 20 or 30 minutes of talk about the book. We're then going to move on to have a little bit more music, I think a couple of pieces by the band again. And then we're going to move on to the reception or party, depending on your perspective and will. And then we'll just carry that on until everybody gets chucked out. So I now want to hand over to one of the book's co-editors, Charlotte Grant, who's going to take us into the first part of this evening's event. Charlotte is Associate Professor of English at Northeastern University, London. So over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to everyone who's come along tonight to help us celebrate Cultures of London, Legacies of Migration. We hope this evening is going to be the start of many more conversations, so it's the kind of summation of a lot of work behind it, as Claire said, across different bits of London University and beyond, but also I hope it's the beginning of more fruitful collaborations. So welcome. Before we hear from our three speakers and before I introduce them, I've got some other specific people to thank. And I'd also like to acknowledge where the book has come from. So firstly, huge thanks to my co-editor, Alistair, whom I can't see. Alistair, where are you? He's over here. Alistair Robinson, my co-editor, who did his PhD in the University of London, and without whom this book would not have happened. So thank you to Alistair. And massive thank you from both of us to our 35 contributors who trusted us with their work, which was quite a thing, because some of them knew us and some of them didn't. I think we've got 17 contributors here this evening, so maybe you could wave. Maybe everyone who's a contributor could stick their arms in the air and wave. So go and speak to them, because they all have stories to tell. Which is brilliant. That's about half the total. Others are in very far-flung places, from Manchester to Scotland, Sweden, Ukraine, China, and the USA, so they couldn't be with us, but they're in the book. We'd like to thank our editor from Bloomsbury, Ben Doyle, and his team, and Bookmarks, who are selling the book this evening at a nice discount, so grab your copy while you can. I'm hugely grateful to Bill Sherman and the Warburg Institute for agreeing to host this event, and to celebrate the cultures of London and London's cultures of diversity more generally, and to the Institute of Advanced Studies for hosting us here at Senate House, and especially John Millington and his team, who have made everything happen. So thank you to them. It's really exciting to be here, as we've just heard. It's very appropriate to be linked to the Warburg, because that is an institution which came wholesale. It was a migrated institution from Central Europe and hosted by the University of London. And it's useful to be in the University of London because it too has a long history of widening access and inclusion, both within London and beyond. So we're in the right place. Thank you again to Connecticut Block O for coming to help us celebrate. We'll hear more from them after our short talks. They are, in case you don't know, they're a performance group based at the South Bank Centre. But more than that, I think they're a fabulous embodiment of London's culture. They offer music, dance, community, and family to over 130 young people who attend their summer schools every summer. And they have programs of events throughout the year in schools and in youth clubs. So speak to them too. And they're fundraising to travel to South Africa. So if you really like them, help them on their way. You might have seen them perform recently with Ezra Collective, the Mercury Prize winners. They were on stage with them at the Albert Hall and at Glastonbury. And you'll certainly hear them and see them if you go to Carnival. And as Claire said, they'll be playing a couple more numbers after we've spoken. So, with 33 chapters and 35 contributors, as Claire's already suggested, it's a hugely collaborative project. We could look at London's cultural history through the lens of migration, suggesting some of the very many different ways that people have come to the city, some staying, some passing through, and who've left their marks on the buildings, texts, images, and street life of the city. It isn't a survey, and it doesn't offer an authoritative perspective. Rather, it's a kaleidoscopic vision. Our chapters offer multiple points of view. Our contributors are mostly, but not only, academics. Edmund Duval over there is a writer and a potter. Livia Wang, who's speaking to us, is a curator and an architect. What brings the books together is a focus on specific locations, a desire to look beneath surfaces, and to draw out stories that aren't always known or visible. The book emerged from a Cultures of London course, and several of our contributors, including Leanne, who's our last person to speak today, have taught on different versions of that course since 2018, as have Alistair and I, and various other contributors. And there are some students who've done that course who are sitting there in the middle, which is lovely to see. Thank you for coming along. But it's not a course book. It came together during the first half of 2020, when it wasn't at all clear what shape COVID would take and what impact it would have on our lives. The focus on migration, and implicitly also on race, on seeking positive stories at times of uncertainty, resonated with the repercussions and responses in the UK to the murder of George Floyd in May 2020. And I think also the focus on the very local is something that also emerged from that moment of COVID, where we all walked obsessively. I know I walked past our cover image, which was adorning Tape Britain at the time, obsessively in the autumn of that year. We've taken a very wide understanding of migration, looking at the movement of plants, for example, as well as people. The book is arranged geographically, central, east, south, west, and north, and then 4 infrastructure chapters, 2 on water and 2 on transport. We've got Joe Carr with us today, who's written on the Routemaster and who used to drive Routemaster buses, so talk to him about buses. In order to start the conversations, we hope that will come out of the book and out of the evening. We've got 3 contributors speaking, and they're going to say something about their own chapters. And we'll hear from them in chronological order, as in we start with a medievalist, we go through the 19th century, and we end up with something very contemporary. And then we'll have a bit more music and chat. So firstly, I'm delighted to welcome our speakers. I think, shall I do you all at once? Yeah, go on. Okay, so first we're going to hear from Alistair Bennett, who is lecturer in medieval literature in the English department at Royal Holloway, University of London. He is talking about a text, a person, and a place. Then we're going to hear from Livia Wang, who is curator of the Van Gogh House, London, who is speaking about Van Gogh's time in London, in Stockwell, as we will hear. And then Leanne Renaud, who's from the Department of English, University of Bristol, but is a Londoner, who is talking about Notting Hill Carnival. So welcome to our speakers.
Thanks very much. Well, it's great to be invited to do this. My contribution to Cultures of London was about the Middle English poem St. Erkenwald. This is a miracle story written in the late 14th century in alliterative longlines, which is set in the Gothic cathedral of Old St. Paul's. Here it comes. Is it going to happen? Something's going to happen. Yes, there we go. Oh, we've gone back. We've missed it. There we go. We briefly saw the Gothic Cathedral of Old St. Paul's. The action of the poem unfolds in the precincts of St. Paul's Cathedral, where a group of workmen discover an ancient tomb in the foundations, and inside it, the body of an unknown man who's gorgeously dressed and miraculously preserved. They summon the bishop, Erkenwald, who's the Bishop of London, to see what they found, and when he arrives, he calls on the man in the tomb to speak. And marvelously, the dead man answers him and reveals that in life he was a judge in the ancient city of London, long before St. Augustine arrived to convert the English to Christianity. He explains that while he was venerated in life for his scrupulous, impartial judgments, his soul is confined to hell because he never had the chance to become a Christian. Erkenwald is so impressed by the judge and his commitment to justice that he weeps, and his tears perform a kind of posthumous baptism so that the judge's soul can be taken up into heaven while his body finally decays. Erkenwald was a recognisable historical figure. Here he is in some stained glass from Norwich, from a church in Norwich. You can read about his life in the Ecclesiastical History of the English People by the Venerable Bede, and in more fanciful terms in a collection of miracle stories composed in the 12th century by a canon of St. Paul's Cathedral called Arcoid. Erkenwald's remains were kept in an elaborate tomb in Old St. Paul's, which might explain why the tomb is such an important feature in the story. And in the 14th century, Bishop of London Robert Braybrooke was engaged in a new effort to generate interest in Erkenwald and his life. It may be that Braybrooke commissioned the alliterative poem that I've written about in this chapter as part of that effort of commemoration. Here's an engraving of Erkenwald's tomb in the cathedral. You can see that on the left there. So I wanted to talk about St. Erkenwald in this volume. In part because of the way it stages an encounter between the Christian culture of its own time and a representative of a non-Christian past whose story had been suppressed and forgotten. The poem certainly celebrates the assimilation of the judge into the Christian faith, but first it asks its Christian protagonists to recognise and admire the values and ideals of a pagan culture that predates and subtends their own. It's a little page of the poem in its one surviving manuscript there. The miraculous tears that allow the judge to be saved are provoked in part by Erkenwald's admiration for the way that he fulfilled his role in the life of the city. More than this, though, the miracle at the centre of the poem allows 14th century Christian Londoners to imagine their pagan ancestors, however briefly, as their contemporaries, and to ask how people from cultures besides their own might inhabit the city that they live in now. When the citizens of London come to see the tomb, the poet tells us that it was as all the world were thither wallen within a hundwheeler, as if all the world had made their way there at a stroke. That's the one bit of Middle English I'm going to do for you this evening, I'm afraid. That's it. That's your lot. But the judge presents a challenge to this image of the city as a polity that includes and accommodates everyone, demanding a reassessment of the past and a reassessment of the way that contemporary Londoners think about who their fellow citizens might be. There are multiple migration stories in the background to St. Erkenwald. The poem begins with an account of Augustine's arrival in England and the conversion of pagan temples into Christian churches, and the literary form of that account recalls in turn the story of Brutus, the descendant of Aeneas, who travelled from the fallen city of Troy to found a new Troy in England, a story that surfaces again in the conversation between Erkenwald and the judge. It's an image of London as the new Troy on the slide there. One of the things that the poem shows us is that the built environment of the city can tell us different things from the textual archive about the people who lived there. The cathedral clergy in the story of St. Erkenwald can't find any record of the pagan judge in their library, and they can't decipher what the poem calls the runish letters on the judge's tomb. But the tomb itself and the body inside remain as part of the architecture of the cathedral, demanding recognition for people and events that these written histories leave out. Seen from the perspective of a place like St. Paul's, history unfolds as the continuous movement of people, and the building itself preserves the legacy that they leave behind them. So for all these reasons then, I was excited to have an opportunity to include a chapter on St. Erkenwald in Cultures of London. This is a poem from London's distant past, but one that has its own take on the legacies of migration and on the question of how different cultures might find their own place and demand their own recognition as part of the story of the city.
Hi, I'm Livia. I'm creative director of Van Gogh House, but I'm also an architect, and I teach first-year undergraduate architecture at the University of Cambridge, so you can imagine you're all my first-year students right now gathered in this room. They all find it quite funny that in my other life, I spend a lot of time studying and discussing Vincent van Gogh. So first of all, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the house. It's a Regency townhouse in Stockwell, 15 minutes walk from the station, whether you're going from Brixton or from Stockwell station, and very close to where Charlotte lives, actually, which is how we got to know each other in lockdown. It's a 3-story house. On the ground floor, you have a front parlour and a back parlour, and then there's bedrooms on the first floor and the second floor. Van Gogh lived there, age 20, in 1873 to 1874, for almost exactly 1 year. He was training to be a clerk at his uncle's art dealership, Goupil & Co. in Covent Garden, and he used to walk there every day. It took him about 45 minutes, and he did a lot of paperwork. He had a sort of very relatable, maybe, life to someone in their 20s from a middle-class upbringing to one that we might relate to now. Since he lived in the house, we've had many other residents. So from 1950 till 2010, the Smith family lived in the house, and it was sort of just as fascinating to us the way they lived in the building, the marks they left behind, as this 1 year that this 20-year-old stayed there, and the sort of stories that he left behind. When we arrived at the house, so my parents bought the house in 2012 at auction. It was completely derelict. Mrs. Smith was in her late 90s. She had done nothing to the building this entire time. There was no central heating. The roof was totally collapsed. And it was a huge project to turn the building round into something that's habitable nowadays. And I guess that was what was so important to us at the time, to turn the building to a place where artists could still live and leave their stories. And so that's what we do now. We have artists come and stay in the house for about 6 months of the year. Our next residents from Japan are arriving in a couple of weeks, and we do 1 exhibition a year as well. And we open the house up to tours, to talks, largely thinking about life in London, what it might be to arrive in London as a stranger, and also thinking a lot about how buildings can tell stories as well. So our quite small London house has to do sort of exhibiting work. It has to still function as a living, breathing home. The plumbing works, the kitchen works. And it also has to be a narrative space, a space that people can come and read and kind of imagine layers of history upon. So not only do we like to support artists, but we want to kind of offer this space for a critical engagement with the past and a critical engagement maybe with Van Gogh's biography too, the little-known period that he spent in London. A big thank you to Charlotte and Alistair for asking me to write this chapter. I guess when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about how remarkable it is to work with Van Gogh. He's so well known. You can stop anyone in the street and they would have heard of him. They could probably name one of his paintings. And I think it's really rare to think of any other artists or painters who sort of exist and take up so much space in people's imaginations and knowledge. We also have amazing access to his letters, so we can really get close to him as a personality, as an individual, thinking a lot about the letters in his period in London. There were letters to his parents and to his family friends, sort of trying to reassure them that he was having a good time, that he was fine, that he was doing well. They're also really relatable to, as I said earlier, a young person, so living away from home. As I said, he was working as a clerk at his uncle's art dealership. He was one of many, many clerks in the city at the time. The rise in administrative labour at this period was really apparent in the censuses at the time. London was also 30 times the size of The Hague, the city that he was living in previously. So he'd grown up in the south of the Netherlands in a village where his parents ran the church. And the biggest city he'd encountered was first The Hague, where he was age 16 and an apprentice to his uncle. He spent a couple of days in Paris and then came to London, seconded to work in their warehouse here. The warehouse mainly dealt in reproductions of prints. So Van Gogh was not only coming into contact with actual paintings, but also with the engravers and the people who are taking copies of these and selling them to more middle-class households, a larger market. What I really love about the letters is that they kind of deal with this coming of age. So it's really age 20 on his own that he's starting to become an adult and have to deal with the realities of the world of work, having to make his own decisions. There's a really wonderful quote where he says, I'm no longer a Frenchman, an Englishman, or a Dutchman, but a cosmopolitan, a man of the world. And if you imagine what you were doing age 20, maybe some of you are 20, it really chimes with the sort of sense of trying to find your sense of self and your place in the city. He was also quite culturally engaged. So, for example, on arrival, he writes to his parents saying that he's making the most of being here. I haven't yet been to the Crystal Palace and the Tower, nor to Tussauds. I'm not at all in a hurry to go and see everything. For the time being, I have enough with the museums and parks, etc. So he's kind of asserting himself as a cultural man, not so sort of interested in the tourist sites. He also read huge amounts of English literature, Dickens, the Brontes, George Eliot, writers who dealt with sort of changing ideas of the role of government in society in the face of the Industrial Revolution. And these concepts of reality is sort of what I discuss in the chapter, and I hope you read the book and come and visit us in the house. This sort of sense of reality was really reflected in the illustrated newspapers of the times, called Black and Whites, which you would have seen in shop windows. He writes about seeing them, the prints drying in the windows of the print houses and being sold on the pavements. He loved these prints. They were sort of proto-photographs because they represented what he thought was a contemporary reality. So illustrators at the time, especially by the newspaper, the London Graphic, were sent into particular situations to draw and report back to the newspaper, and then stories were edited around these illustrations. So it was really this sense of being there and being a witness to whatever was happening. He also really loved the visual form of the etching as well, and the line work, which we get to know and love in Van Gogh's work. We know later that after his period in London, when he was first considering the idea of becoming an artist, he actually considered himself potentially in the career of an illustrator, and this idea of kind of depicting embodied realities, which led to a later work, Prisoner's Round, which is a very well-known painting that people suspect has a self-portrait of Van Gogh in, but is, in fact, a copy of a doré etching of Millbank Prison. I might finish on a quote where Van Gogh says, "My whole life is aimed at making the things from everyday life that Dickens describes and these artists draw." And so we really can get into his mind from these letters and the way he wants to depict himself as a cultural person within the Victorian period. Obviously, his time in the UK was incredibly influential. And like I say, I'd love for you to read the chapter and come and visit us at the house and kind of talk about these materials with us, because we have lots of these newspapers on display, we have the material of the building as well, and this kind of relationship to the city and how our local area and London as well has changed over the past 150 to 200 years. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name's Leanne. I'm a lecturer in Caribbean literatures and cultures at the University of Bristol, but raised in West London, we cannot forget where we come from. So this is Notting Hill Carnival. These pictures are taken from last year's Notting Hill Carnival. This is my mass band, Fanatic Mass. I don't know how many of you remember a radio station called Choice FM? Yeah, okay, excellent, love that. You remember the DJ Martin J? Yeah, this is his mass band, this is him. This gorgeous little fella, that's my son, Lucas. He's cute, right? Thank you. That's all me, all me. This was last year, 2023, this was his second time at Carnival, his first time playing mass, his first time in costume. He was 2 months shy of being 2. We are big Carnival fans in our house. We're hoping that if we just keep taking him, he will understand that this is life, right? So that's what we're hoping. So this is Notting Hill Carnival. But this too is Notting Hill Carnival. The picture hasn't come out very clearly, but this picture has been reprinted in the book, in my chapter, if you're interested. This picture was taken in 2020, I think, so it was when kind of in the midst of the pandemic, and we knew that Carnival wasn't going to happen, so we were thinking about kind of alternative ways to celebrate. The photo is a brainchild of Fiona Compton, who runs the Know Your Caribbean platform. She's a community historian, currently based in St. Lucia, a photographer, an artist, and Fiona's awesome. And what we have here is, this picture was taken by my friend called Sherwin, and the gent there is my partner. This is what I mean when I say like we're Carnival people, yeah? And it's called The Jab and the La Diablesse. And the reason why I feel like this picture is as much Carnival as the first picture is because this picture, I guess, points to the kind of tradition and legacies of resistance that led to the Caribbean carnivals that we see in Trinidad and so on, but also led to the carnival that we see in Notting Hill today. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the jab, for example, but the jab is a staple in Grenadian carnival, but also we'll see him across carnivals everywhere. There were people playing jab at Notting Hill last year. And it's kind of this, I guess this reclamation is going on with this figure of the jab. So jab means devil. It's like a Creole term for devil. And it's kind of playing on the fact that enslaved people and then black people in the Caribbean post-emancipation were thought of by white colonizers as black devils. So the people said, "Bet, you think we're black devils? You haven't seen anything yet." So we paint ourselves completely black, black oil. We wear helmets, like devil helmets. We do all kinds of interesting subversive things. And yeah, it's just like a really beautiful kind of instance of resistance that takes to the streets. And it takes to the streets in London. If you guys go to Notting Hill Carnival, the chances are you'll see somebody playing jab. I see someone nodding in the background. You've seen, yeah, they looked excellent last year, right? So this is as much carnival as the last one, and it's very much kind of playing with that history of kind of reclamation, but also a history of resistance, defiance, subversiveness. What do I want to say? And yeah, I guess what I want to say is that though the Jab and the La Jablesse very much have their roots in the Caribbean, it's this history of defiance, of subversiveness, of resistance that is very much kind of at the root of Notting Hill Carnival. So Carnival was kind of started, I think, in 1959 in the UK as a reaction to the Notting Hill race riots of '58. It started in St Pancras Town Hall. Claudia Jones kind of ushered that in. And then a few years later, it took to the streets and became kind of the carnival that we know today. And the carnival in Notting Hill has always been a way of saying, I'm here, right? It's been a way of saying, I'm here for Caribbean people in Britain. It's also a way of celebrating our culture. So my chapter in Cultures of London thinks a bit about the ways that Notting Hill Carnival still achieves this kind of tradition of subversiveness and defiance and resistance. Despite the fact that the carnival is a commercial celebration, we're still able to do that. And the chapter thinks a little bit about community creation. It thinks a bit about the art of costuming or masquerade. And it also talks a little bit about the power of just being visible on the streets in the way that we're visible on the streets. And I think all of these things are really important for, remembering Carnival. So I hope you all are attending Carnival this year. I'll be on the street, full costume, skin out, as we like to say. But I hope as you enjoy the celebrations, you always kind of remember that there's this deeper history, and I would love to talk to any of you about it later. So thank you very much.
My name is Julia, and this poem is written by one of our members, and it's called Raging Waters. The river is loud and raging. Its water flows through our great city, through each street, garden and back alley into our souls. Every second of every minute, every hour of every day, new streams are formed, new sounds. New sounds emerge and creativity thrives. But without those artists of the past, the music of the past, these streams connecting us all would not exist today. So give tribute, give thanks, because yesterday the river was a mere stream, but today it is raging.
Thank you very much. I heard that poem, that spoken word, last year at Blocko's summer school, and I really wanted that to be represented here in that space. So thank you very much for doing that. Now we're going to hear a little bit more music, and then we will do some mingling. But feel free to move. Don't feel you have to sit while Blocko are playing, and if it's too loud, you can also escape.